lovely sunshine, I think. Just wait a little moment longer. We'll get started. Okay, let's crack on, and then hopefully a few more people will join as we go. Just do the introduction. So thank you everyone for joining this, which is our penultimate session in our Amberjack Early Careers Expert Series. My name is Su Hadley. I am the head of attraction at Amberjack, and Amberjack, as many of you already know, is a leading provider of RPO services to the early careers sector with expertise across attraction, assessment, candidate management, technology, and learning and development. And today you'll see I'm joined by Emma Cooksley, Early Careers Manager at Morrisons. And we're going to be talking about how we use data to analyse your early careers attraction campaign to improve and evolve your attraction strategies. So it is designed to be a short session over lunch, but we will have a little time for Q&A later in the session. So please, if you have any questions to go, do put them in the chat. I'll put a little reminder there later. And if we can't answer them all in the session, we will include them in our 6 at 6 follow-up later. So you'll all receive a copy of that. If any of you have joined some or all of our sessions over the past 6 weeks, and I can see some familiar names, you'll know we talk a lot about data. Using data to evidence and inform your decisions, using it to set benchmarks and inform and manage stakeholders. And today we're going to talk about what kind of data you should be gathering in campaign and how you can use that to remain agile in your campaign delivery. What sort of data should you be monitoring and at which point in the campaign? What to look out for, where are the red flags, and how data can help you pivot a campaign where it is required. And for many of us, that is the case. And finally, how you use the data to evidence recommendations and evolve your campaign strategies year on year. So we invited Emma to join us today, having just completed the end of campaign review with Morrisons for our 9th attraction campaign. So it's fresh in all our minds, and hopefully we'll be ready to talk about some of the data points that we've gone over in that with Emma. But Emma, perhaps we should start by a little introduction from you and sharing a little bit about the Morrisons campaign for context.
Okay, hi everybody. So my name's Emma. I am the Early Careers Manager for Morrisons. I nearly forgot what I did then for a living. And have worked with Amberjack. I've done this role for the last 8 years. So 8 campaigns through with Amberjack. And each year we differ in what schemes that we hire, but there's fairly consistent ones in there, roughly 9 to 10 graduate schemes for degree apprenticeship schemes. Taking in approximately 100 to 120 colleagues across that. On a tiny little team, I tend to differ across the year. There's me and another consistent person. And then we use our graduate and degree apprentice population during that assessment season so that we can up those numbers and facilitate those assessment centres. So that's a little bit about me and about what we do within Morrisons.
Perfect. Thanks, Emma. With all of that, I don't think I'm going to be wrong in saying it brings with it some challenges. You have quite a bit going on, and you have, as an organisation, some challenging ambitions as well. Perhaps you want to tell us a little about those.
Yeah, so obviously, you know, Morrisons is an organisation that's across the whole of the country, and we do head into Scotland as well in degree apprenticeships, unfortunately not into Wales, but we're recruiting into the 4 arms of the business. So our central office based in Bradford, our logistics sites across the country, our manufacturing sites across the country, and also into our stores. And within that, some of those schemes can be really quite niche, particularly in places like manufacturing. So not only is it manufacturing operational, as in running a site, but also manufacturing buying, as our manufacturing business sells out to wholesale and also buys in from farmers. So quite complex in some of those, and some of those schemes are very bespoke and really difficult to gauge how we attract into those, and also sometimes we struggle in some of those areas. In the younger degree apprenticeship market, we do a scheme that's food technical, again, for our manufacturing business. And we find that is also very difficult to recruit to. The degree apprenticeship market is totally different than graduates anyway, with lesser ability to actually get out and about face to face, unless you are in those local schools next to where your sites are based. So we find that particularly difficult. As in every organisation, our challenges are around where we, land with our DE and I splits, around gender, diversity, and how we manage that in pockets across the country that might be very different. And schemes are very different. You'll all know that if you operate STEM schemes, that they can be very different in gender split and sometimes diversity. So those also are a challenge for us sometimes. And of course, with all of those schemes and a fairly diverse business that's geographically, got that spread, the number of stakeholders we have across the business is massive. And the young talent area, the early careers talent that we bring into the business very much sits on very highly in the agenda of the organisation. And therefore, some of our stakeholders are those really important directors who want to make sure their schemes are successful and that we are progressing our young talent through the organisation, and we're recruiting future leaders. So all of that makes it quite a complex little task.
I think we'll talk a little bit more about managing stakeholders as we go, because I know that that's a very important role for anybody in early careers management, for sure. And if we come back to our subject of today, but using data to analyse your campaign and making those campaign improvements, I've touched on some key data points over the course of the sessions that we've run generally, but what data points are important to you and for you to take to your stakeholders?
So I think we have to be really structured in what we do and how we use the data from previous years and data that's out there in our universities, so that we make sure that our attraction strategy hits the mark for where we have seen success previously. We use with Amberjack a university matrix that this is a scoring mechanism, so we've put some science behind our decision making. And we can show where we've got great diversity splits in universities, gender splits in universities, where universities rank, and also what previous success they've brought us at different stages of our recruitment process. We can then tier those into those that we would use our budget very wisely, to those that we would go and actually pay to sit face to face, those that we may get involved with, but we wouldn't necessarily pay over the odds to do so, and those universities that we're still going to include in our attraction strategy, but perhaps wouldn't be a money spend piece. So we can very much use the science to actually give us the basis for our university attraction. We would also want to look through our end of campaign review that we've just had at what was the success of that, and because that can differ year on year. So we always have to remain agile and flexible around what we do in that attraction strategy. And, the guys at Amberjack will know Morrisons moves very quickly. We are a fast-paced business. And sometimes even within our attraction season, we will move and change what we're going to do, dependent on what we see coming through as our pipeline of talent in our, matching our modelled numbers. So we will decide at the beginning of each year how many candidates we need at the very top end of that pipeline to be able to fulfil the numbers requirement that the business has got. We almost work backwards in those numbers so that we're using that data to actually say that means, I can clearly say to the business, it means I need to do 10 assessment centres with 12 candidates on each to be able to fulfil, dependent on the percentage success rates that we see in previous campaigns. And we will know those still won't match. They might be different. We have to remain agile in season. As one scheme that was successful in one year potentially won't be in the following year. And we do see that dramatically change each season. We can start off with great pipelines, but as you all know, if you're recruiting into a graduate market, that the speed of how we go about that is essential to make sure those candidates get through our assessment centres first. We also look at our NPS data, so our Net Promoter Score, and how candidates feel about our process. So we'll definitely take that in consideration at our end of campaign review as to where we may need to adapt. What do we see? And those statistics we also carry on through to end of campaign, so we can see where certain populations, maybe male, female, diversity splits, where they may fall away throughout the process, and just exactly how is our assessment process giving us that balance of what we would be looking for in the organisation.
Bless you, Emma, making you talk an awful lot today. Catching up with things. So once we've done some of this campaign prep, so looking at the modelled numbers, building out the university matrix, there's, we move into the campaign period. And of course, there's a lot going on, as you say, week to week, because I think we start assessment centres quite early for you, for those that apply quite early in the process. And we've got so many to get through. We then get on the train, basically. Can you share what sort of touch points we have with you and your team, and what you want to learn from each of those interactions?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, the relationship that we have with Amberjack is a very, very close one. It's almost daily contact when you're in season, but there are some regular touch points that we have in place that, without them, we would find it very difficult to keep up with the volume of assessment centres. As Sue has said, we tend to head out to assessment in the middle of October, having opened applications at the beginning of September. And then we will aim for graduates certainly to be finished recruitment-wise before Christmas, and we will shut down for Christmas early because obviously December is a golden month for us. And then we'll start degree apprenticeship recruitment in the new year through until, fingers crossed, round about the end of March. Within that, we have a weekly pipeline call that basically looks at every single scheme, the numbers in those schemes, at which stage of application process those applicants are at. And we will make decisions as to whether we close down applications dependent on the strength of that pipeline. And that also will still continue to track as we get into assessment centres for those particular schemes as to the success rates. So actually, did we think we were ready to close a pipeline down when actually the success rate at assessment is low, and it might not be as buoyant as we were thinking? We might need to stay open a little bit longer. We also have attraction reports that will show us what those attraction methods that we've chosen in our strategy are delivering for us in season, and is it bringing those applicants forward? Therefore, we can make those twists and changes as we move through campaign if we are missing a trick, or if we're seeing pipelines that don't have that strength of application. We also have a monthly review summarising the 4 weeks, 5 weeks of that month in particular, and making some of those bigger, more strategic decisions as to what we might, and starting to really map out what a following season might look like, as it looks at those bigger trends and those insights, and have we touched the mark with what we're doing in any particular year. And then, as we've just had literally last week, our end of campaign review that summarises the whole of our year and sets the benchmarks ready for the following season. And we will move into our preparation for 2026 intake, September 2026. Our preparation will start for that pretty much next week, as we'll start to look at our processes, look at our attraction strategy. Sue and the guys will be putting together those numbers to create our university matrix. I'll reach out to the business to say, what is it that we want to do for the following year? And we can really start to get to grips and get ready and waiting for all of those events at universities to come live for us to decide what we're doing. And, for a lot of what we do, it is about having that key relationship and managing those numbers all the way along. It's a really detailed, mind-blowing. I think we've made it into an industry in its own right that helps us to track and make sure that we can say to our stakeholders, those key universities that are useful to us to provide great candidates are the ones that we're engaging with.
That's brilliant. I think we'll talk some more about the end of campaign session. I'll try and give you a brief breather, but one of the things that annoyingly will have just occurred to me that I wanted to bring up was, how can you go about prepping for a new season campaign? Because this is what we come across a lot when you don't necessarily know the exact requirements at the point you're getting the recommendation. So we're doing the end of campaign review, we are preparing data, we make headline recommendations at that stage, and then, as you say, from next week we want to start going into preparation. But how can you do that when you don't fully know what your requirements will be at this stage? Are there some givens, some things that you sort of move around and ways that you can work around that?
Yeah, so certainly there's some givens, there's some schemes and some areas of the business that I know will still be recruiting. The numbers might not be as clear as I would want them at this stage of the game, but I know that we will need to go out and do specifics to attract into some of those schemes. And we can gain that insight, earlier, maybe not the numbers, but we can gain that insight from looking at how our existing schemes are also performing, where we're seeing attrition. So we will map very, across our schemes where we see success, where we see the potential, where we see and how fast we see people moving. Since, levy funding rules changed in 2017, we've got a really clear picture of what our schemes do for us and where our people, ex-alumni of schemes, have now progressed to. So the tracking of individuals' performance and their potential doesn't stop when they finish with a scheme. It carries on with them through their career path in the organisation. So we can clearly see those that get up to director level, and believe you me, we have got people from our schemes now sit at director level in the organisation. And we can track the percentage success rate of those that we see as high performers moving through the organisation. And that, again, in those stats helps us clearly say, if we're going to look at this as a pure return on investment for what we do to put into our early career schemes, that would be a scheme that would stay. There may be others that perhaps we've not got as right, that might be more turbulent because of how the business is operating at any particular moment, that we might park for a year whilst we make sure that we do get it right, while we take that feedback from those on schemes and adjust so that we can then move forward with another year. And that's not unusual for us to do.
Brilliant. Sorry to throw you a slight curveball in there in terms of what we were going to have a look at, but I'll take us back to the end of campaign. And as I say, we've just run the end of campaign. You've touched on it a little bit. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what format that takes, what data you expect to see and you need to see, and that sort of level of analysis, and what happens once you have that, what comes next after that as well?
Yeah, so end of campaign for me is sort of the excitement at end of season. You think, well, I say we think end of season. For me, the end of season is never really there until they walk through the door in September. Should we start to see reneges across that summer period, or A-level result dropout, we may well be heading back out to market. And we allow the business to do that. I do have some cut-off dates in there, obviously. So we say if we are heading back out, we would only ever do it up to sort of that June point where exams have maybe finished for graduates. And that is purely if we get reneges. It's not something that we would really want to do with a brand new, fresh campaign at that time of year. End of campaign is a whole load of data. It is all based on data to get us the ability to be able to build and move forward. As you will all know, you can't stand still in this market. The demands and what graduates, young people are looking for move and change. And we've seen that dramatically over the last few years after sort of the COVID piece, and then students starting to think we're moving away from Gen Z into a new generation that think very differently. And the data at our end of campaign, everything through the success of attraction, all the way through to those numbers at assessment centre. At which stage do certain demographics of people fall away from the assessment process, leading into our materials and how successful they have been, and whether there has been anything in the scoring of those that we believe has disadvantaged any specific area of applications, to make that change and to adapt and get that right and even better for the following year. There is no exact science through this, but certainly things like NPS data can lead you, that scoring can lead you to maybe behave and do things differently. Degree apprenticeships, we also look really closely at those. In the end of campaign, they are split out as separate campaigns, as they are very different, particularly in that attraction piece. And we would look again at all of those numbers. There's some beautiful pie charts, bar charts, a whole load of percentages in there.
If you love a chart, we've got it in there, haven't we?
If we love a chart, we have a chart. I do like a chart. And actually, a lot of the information we get in that isn't just about shaping a future year. It's also about building those, for those stakeholders, some really clear, hard evidence behind why you are making the suggestions and trying to guide them in the right way. So it can also be used as a tool to market what we either should be doing more of or what we should be doing less of, which is really important to influence those key stakeholders that might want to continue in the same vein year and year and year, but actually, is it bringing them what they wanted? And if it was their business, would they be paying pounds and pence to do that? You know, it is my role to be making sure I give all of those hard facts in the right way and influence those stakeholders to perhaps do things a little differently, and to use the science to back that up.
And I think you've answered probably a little bit of my last question, which was how much you sort of rely on the data and insight that we're able to provide you with. And obviously you've been close to it every week of the campaign, but to see it, it's almost to see it all up there on the big screen, if you like. You know, how much do you rely on the data to feed back to stakeholders and support the recommendations for development and direction of the schemes? You've touched on it a little bit, but particularly around, I suppose, to support the recommendations for development and direction.
Definitely. I think first off, the end of campaign review and all of that data proves a point in my head. So it almost consolidates in my head what I might have seen across the season. And also some things that it's like you knew maybe weren't heading as you planned, but the data shows you that. And there are, you know, some of those more difficult to recruit schemes. There are people in our business that have some really quite set ideas of where they might want to head to attract, or how they might want to go about that. And it's really important that, you know, we're honest with this data, and with those schemes that perhaps are the more difficult to recruit, it can be really crucial that I can actually show a return on investment in candidate numbers versus the spend that took place to actually gain those candidate numbers and the success. So we use that quite heavily in our influencing. And, you know, very much this is a business where, you know, it is about, if it was my money, would I do it? And I have to be honest with business areas. I might not win every argument, but I would certainly try to influence showing data and using that data from end of campaign and some of those beautiful, colourful charts to really simply explain, look at what it does or doesn't do for you.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think I'll take a moment with one of these questions to give you a little bit of a breather, Emma. But I see that Maddie's popped a question in here just saying, how do you balance benchmarking results against previous campaigns with industry standards? So we do look at previous campaign data. We do know and understand the advantage that we have is, especially at this point in our relationship with Morrisons, is obviously we have been doing it for a long time for you. So we know and understand the campaigns. The attraction world doesn't move quite as quickly as some areas of the client businesses that we work with, you know, retail being one of them. So attraction doesn't change significantly year to year. What does change quite typically is candidate behaviour. So we can build a campaign, we can set things up that start at about, you know, 80-90% of what we think is going to happen, and as you say, using that data as we go to evidence how we make changes. So the existing results that we know and working against what we know of the market and how we benchmark those results is important, but it's not critical, and it's not the be all and end all. It is a guide. It's the bumper slides down a bowling alley that just keep you in lane and make sure that you're learning as you go. And I think that speaks a little bit as to one of the other questions in the chat when it talks about qualitative feedback from candidates. Actually, I think this is probably one for you, Emma. How do you balance the quantitative data that you're getting, that we're providing you with feedback from candidate experiences when you're developing that strategy moving forward? How do you get that balance right?
I think it depends on whether there's something that is really clearly either very right or very not right in that candidate feedback as to whether you would react to that or not. Sometimes the scoring in something like an NPS is great, but the comments are sometimes even more important, and particularly comments that we can see a pattern with, that haven't, I don't know, say there's a group of candidates that haven't particularly liked one element of that recruitment process, that wouldn't necessarily show in any data that we've got elsewhere, but the comments would show us that maybe we would need to look and tweak an element of something that we did.
Brilliant. And I think the other questions in here had similar sort of vibes. How do you balance? There's a lot of how do you balance. So we talk a lot about evidence data. But the defining of success. So Becca has put a question in here, I think getting you back for many questions you might have posed during the end of campaign last week as well. So when you're looking at campaign data, how do you define success? And are there any key benchmarks or indicators you consistently rely on?
Yeah, so there are some key indicators that we would use as a business. Firstly, obviously, the recruitment of the higher needs, as we started out at the beginning of season, is what we would ultimately be aiming for. So those numbers, those higher numbers, is where we would want to head to. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that across a season for us as a business, that wouldn't maybe move and change. As we head out at the beginning of a season with one intention, however, the business can change very rapidly, and therefore middle of season, it might be a completely different picture. So providing we've met those higher numbers to the extent that the business area is happy with what they've received out of that. I think importantly as well, we would want to be improving year on year in our diversity splits, very important to us. And also to balance that across different schemes, and also balance it across both graduates and degree apprenticeships. They are very different in that diversity and can be very different within certain schemes as well. I mentioned STEM before, that can have a very specific diversity, perhaps to some of those STEM schemes. And also we would really want to maintain what we do have at the moment, which is that 50-50 male-female in our gender splits as well. One of those key priorities for us in the business is that we are doing that. And again, within specific schemes, we would see that as very different. So, women working in manufacturing, women working in logistics would be key things that we would want to try and improve as we go through our scheme. So we would look at that data to see if we were disadvantaging through what we do any of those specific areas within our recruitment from diversity or gender splits.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so very much, Emma, for your input. You've done the lion's share of the talking today, and I'll be honest, as it's our 6th session in the series, I certainly appreciate it. And delightfully, next week I will not be featured at all. Maddie will be running the session, so that'll be good. But I think it's really nice for everyone to hear from the employer's point of view. So thank you to everyone for joining us. We will send out the 6 at 6 takeaways a little bit later. I will answer all the other questions in that as well and make sure. So our last session in the series will be next week. We'll be joined by our partners Adway, talking about revolutionising paid social media for better targeting in early careers recruitment. If you haven't signed up, there is still time, and I will pop the link in the chat, but it will also be in the follow-ups a little bit later. But Emma, thank you again. You've been absolutely wonderful. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope that you found it truly very interesting. Thanks all.
Thank you.